Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu. The European Union has consistently demonstrated its innovative approach to technology and data protection through the implementation of, we could call them groundbreaking laws, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, which we often hear under its acronym of GDPR, and the Electronic Identification, Authentication, and Trust Services Regulation, which we are hearing more and more under its acronym eIDAS. And so these legal frameworks have set or are setting the bar higher and higher for data protection, privacy, digital identity standards, and really establishing the European Union as a global leader in these domains. And we typically see, at least it was the case with the General Data Protection Regulation, is that many other jurisdictions in the world seem to follow the path that the EU sets. There's always kind of a few years or certain years behind, but the EU seems to set the trend for these things. So I think for our audience here of the SSI Orbit podcast, who are very interested in everything self-sovereign identity, digital credentials, digital attestations, I think this eIDAS regulation is something that's worth maybe spending a little bit of time on and just understanding the history of it, how it came about. Is there anything that exists out there that's similar to that? So it'd be interesting to hear from you, Viky, on kind of how eIDAS came about, how it's undergone changes and revisions, and just some context setting for this episode.
Sure. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to your podcast, which I'm a follower for some time. I will start giving a bit of context for eIDAS. First of all, there are several types of legal acts in the European Union. Some of them are binding, some others not. A regulation is a binding legislative act automatically throughout the European Union on its date of application. So it must be applied in its entirety across all member states as is. While a directive, another type of legislative act, sets out a goal that all the European countries must achieve. However, it is up to the individual countries to transpose a directive into their national laws and how to decide and on how to reach those goals. Referring now to eIDAS 2, because everybody talks now about eIDAS 2 and the EUDI wallet. But where is this coming from and what is eIDAS? So historically, we had the European Directive on Electronic Signature in 1999 with the purpose to facilitate the use of electronic signatures and to contribute to their legal recognition. After 10 years of being on the market, the directive was repealed by eIDAS regulation, originally in 2014. So eIDAS stands for Electronic Identification and Trust Services for Electronic Transactions in the Internal Market. So eIDAS, the goal of eIDAS was to create the EU foundations on a common legal framework across all member states for citizens, companies, public administrations to carry our transactions online with legal value, because we are talking about legal value and across different countries, member states. eIDAS regulation has two parts. One part is related to electronic identification and electronic identity, and one related to so-called trust services, which means electronic signatures, timestamps, electronic seals, preservation of electronic signatures over a long period of time, certificates for website authentication. Now, as part of the legislative process of a regulation, after several years of being on the market, is followed by an assessment conducted by the European Commission to see how that piece of legislation delivered and what delivered, if something needs to be changed or adjusted or improved. So it is appropriate to modify the scope and specific provisions, of course, taking into consideration the technological development, because we are in a continuous move and evolution from technological point of view. The market is evolving, the citizens are having different expectations. So after that period, during 2020, has been conducted an extensive impact assessment on eIDAS regulation, carried out by a group of experts, analyzing every detail of eIDAS. Public authorities, trust service providers, conformity assessment bodies, electronic identity providers, supervisory bodies, the entire ecosystem of eIDAS has been assessed to identify what is working, what is not working well, what should be adjusted. And based on that impact assessment and on the evidence collected, the group of experts working on that provided options to the European Commission and a substantial input for the introduction of a new European Union framework for digital identity, the EUDI wallet concept. So what lessons we have learned from eIDAS, good and bad lessons? What solutions could be done to solve the issues that have been identified? So I would start with the electronic identity part, because that was the one having a major improvement.
If I could just say, like, obviously we're talking about some improvements between the 2014 first version of eIDAS and the current 2.0 version, which has been in the works for a few years. And I'm assuming that different European nation states, even over that period of time, have evolved in their own journeys of digital identity as well, right? So I'm sure that is helped as inputs for the new version.
Yes, absolutely. Since the entering into force of eIDAS in 2014 until 2020, we have noticed that only 14 member states had in place a notified electronic identification schemes, which means only around 59% of citizens were able to have an electronic identity mechanism. From those 14 electronic identity schemes, only 7 were mobile. So you can notice that we're not in line with the expectations of and the needs of the citizens, because they want to use mobile devices to get access to everything. Also, very few public services were available cross-border, even for those citizens with an electronic identification mean. So there are several pain points and problems identified. First of all, we have acknowledged an increased demand by public and private service for trusted identification and for exchange of attributes. The current eIDAS regulation, the eID framework, is limited to the public sector services. So there are no rules or conditions to allow the private sector services to get access to the national electronic identification schemes. Also, the users have expectations for seamless and trusted solutions to identify themselves and to share attributes across borders that were not possible under the current eIDAS regulation. Alternative, we have digital identification solutions by private providers that are not recognized by the government, but they still exist and have been implemented in several private use cases, like the Nordic countries that delivered so-called bank IDs for their customers. And last but not least, data control and security concerned were insufficiently addressed by the digital identity solution. So the general shift of the market to more comprehensive identity ecosystem that integrates attributes and credentials, some of them carrying sensitive data, such as the healthcare sector, that makes necessary to develop a new eID ecosystem that is able to effectively protect personal data and to offer full user control, because we are talking about control of our data, not of possession of our data. In the digital world, you cannot possess, you cannot own something, you can only control. So to summarize, why only 40 member states issued electronic identification schemes, you may ask. While it was not mandatory for the member states to provide their citizens an electronic identification mechanism, it was a voluntary process and also a long and complex procedure. So it's up to each member state based on their priorities, based on their culture and local situation to provide or not, or to wait to put in place such a scheme. Also, private providers of digital identity attributes are not subject to a harmonized regulatory framework, ensuring trust and security cross-border. The set of identity data provided by eIDAS, the current eIDAS, is too limited and rigid. We have noticed also inconsistent interpretation, divergent application, and lack of acceptance of the eIDAS regulation in relation to QATS certificates, for instance. So all these pain points identified, the current proposal, the eIDAS 2 proposal, is trying to solve these problems and to create a new electronic identity ecosystem, having the citizen as a central part of it.
Yeah, so for the 14 member states that had ID programs, obviously all of them had their own context, their own differences, their own implementations, their own, I guess, levels of assurances. If we were to,
yeah, there are a lot of discussions around the level of assurance of an electronic identification scheme, which is the best level of assurance substantial or level of assurance high. Can we allow them both, or should we raise the bars to only high level of assurance for electronic identification means? Well, the EUDI wallet will be an electronic identification means, so with the highest level of assurance high. Of course, within the wallet, you can onboard also electronic identification means existing, notified already on the market, that have level of assurance substantial, with additional mechanisms to raise their level to high to be able to be onboarded on the wallet.
Maybe we could talk a bit about the ecosystem of participants. I would like to move the conversation into talking a little bit more about the EU digital wallet that you just mentioned. But maybe before getting into that, as we were talking about different nation states having their different implementations, and I know the financial sector, especially in the Nordic countries, as you mentioned, was used as maybe a source of truth, or being able to back credentials or digital IDs that were issued. It seems that with this movement, you're shifting the source of truth, and the LOA high credentials are becoming possible because of the different nation states, ministries, or governments becoming the source of truths for the legal natural person identity data. How does the landscape shift now of what it is currently with perhaps the financial sector and private sector providers of digital ID as we're shifting into this new framework? Like, how do we look at the ecosystem of today and what this ecosystem is going to look like in the upcoming years as we see more adoption here?
This is a good question. I believe, my personal opinion is that both will continue to exist and to interplay each other, because we currently have member states with electronic identification means provided by private sector. That is a specific mechanism according to which the member state should notify to the European Commission that electronic identification mean and should endorse that electronic identification mean issued by the private sector. So if we look, there is a portal with the list issued and maintained, updated by the European Commission, with all electronic identification means currently in place today. And you will see that there are providers from private sector, but also most of them from the member states issuance directly. We have Italy, a specific, a particular case where we have both electronic identity card issued by the government and also SPID, which is an electronic identification means issued by the private sector. And both are recognized by Italy and are in place. We had a tremendous growth in SPID. Currently, 34 million Italian citizens have SPID and are generating 1 billion transactions per year with SPID. So essentially, you can use it to authenticate yourself to more than 15,000 public services, and you get access instantly, and you can obtain whatever you need from a public administration based on SPID. At the same time, you can use SPID to generate electronic signatures instantly with legal value. So you see, it's not one-size-fits-all solution or approach. I don't think that would be the key. And the market will arrange, and we'll see that the citizens what they will prefer to use and to opt for. Because, for instance, the usage of European Digital Identity Wallet is not mandatory for the citizens. The member states are obliged to issue and to give possibility to the citizens to have such a mechanism, but the citizens are not obliged to use them. So we will see.
Do these two systems, so there's an existing vibrant ecosystem of, you could call it decentralized ID or digital ID to some extent in Italy, like does this new eIDAS world, these enhancements merge with this existing ecosystem, or does it become two parallel ecosystems? It seems like with the amount of traction and adoption there is in a country like Italy and then in other EU nation states, it's maybe more about just adapting the existing models so that you have the right data control and security principles, that you have the right structure in place for cross-border utilization. Do you see them merging together or being more divergent?
I don't think they will be divergent. Of course, there is a need for a period to have in place the new eIDAS 2 framework and to roll out. They will coexist for sure for a certain period of time in all countries that have in place an electronic identification mean. Then we will see how we'll transition to the EUDI wallet. I think is not divergent anyway.
So if we jump into the EU digital wallet, there was, I need to look, a new version of, and it's called the Common Union Toolbox for Coordinated Approach Towards the European Digital Identity Framework. I needed to read that because I had trouble remembering it. But it describes what is proposed, I guess, by the European Union for this European Digital Identity Wallet Architecture Reference Framework. There is a toolbox that's being built currently, which to my understanding is going to serve as a base for nation states to openly use and build their version of their wallet product or products on top of this common framework. And this common framework is going to allow for a lot of this interoperability and data control and all the things we've been talking about here in coordination with the eIDAS.
Yeah, well, the architecture and reference framework, the IRF, has been developed by a group of experts, so-called Toolbox Expert Group, which is under coordination from the European Commission. In these Toolbox Expert Groups, there are expert representatives from each member state working together to draft this specific document. So what is the purpose of this IRF and where applies? So the IRF represents an agreement among member states and the Commission on the European Digital Identity Wallet concept, its functionalities and specifications required to develop the so-called reference implementation of the wallet for the interoperable EUDI wallet solution. The IRF is not covering all the specifications needed for the EUDI wallet solution, but is instead focused primarily on enabling the large-scale projects working to develop their use case. So is intended for the reference implementation. What is the reference implementation? Is the solution built with an open source license by a consortium that has been awarded following a tendering process by the European Commission. And this consortium is developing the first build of the reference implementation. This first solution will be used by the large-scale pilot consortia to use it, to test it in their respective use cases, providing after that input for future iterations of the IRF. So the main use case for the IRF and for the reference implementation is the secure identification and authentication at level of assurance high. This is the key use case in all large-scale pilots consortium. Then we have others use cases built by the other consortia. But what is important to highlight is that the IRF is a living document. It's not static. It's not this version and that's it. We'll have further iterations to align, first of all, to the final form of eIDAS 2, because we know now is under the final stage from a legislative perspective standpoint. Also, the IRF is developed with consideration on the ongoing existing standards and that are available at European level. For instance, the Toolbox Expert Group has invited stakeholders and standardization bodies to provide input relevant for the purpose of their work during the last year. European Telecommunication Standard Institute, which is one of the standardization bodies recognized in European Union, presented their works on new standards development in support of the EUDI wallet and new trust services. Cloud Signature Consortium, for instance, presented the specific mechanism for generating digital signatures through the EUDI wallet. So you see, is an ongoing alignment and development between standardization, legislation, and IRF development.
So if we talk about the high level of assurance, digital identity for a person, there is a definition inside of the ARF around person identification data, PID, and then person identification data providers. Can you talk a little bit about that? That seems like a key component that is bound to the wallet, which allows for high value transactions to happen from there. So could you talk a bit about this PID?
PID stands for Person Identification Data. And there is a set of minimum data that should be included in the PID. Then we have additional data that may be included, is up to the member states and also to the specific use case. Then we are talking about PID provider. What is a PID provider? The PID provisioning is at the discretion of each member state. So it's not something that the private sector could decide. I am a PID provider starting from tomorrow. I need to, it won't be possible that. So it should be a prerogative of each member state. And we will have for sure differences from a state to another. What is the minimum set of person identification data is clear for everybody. But what we can find in Italy, for instance, as a set of person identification data extended, we will not find in France or Germany. We'll have differences. Each prospective EUDI wallet solution provider, in that case, should align with the respective member state, because onboarding of the PID in the EUDI wallet solution is specific to each member state.
And then there are some large-scale pilots that are happening in, I understand, 4 different consortiums. So one of them is the EUDI Wallet Consortium. This is one of the 4 large-scale pilots. Are all of 4 large-scale pilots about using this PID in different use cases?
Yes, absolutely. So I would like to give a brief information about these large-scale pilots. They are all composed from representatives from member states, from different member states, and private sector. So it's a mix, not only member states, not only private sector. That was one of the main requirements when the call for application was launched by the European Commission. We have 4 winners, 4 consortia. And here we are, EUDI Wallet Consortium, that has main use cases, mobile travel payments and organizational digital identity, covering all European Union countries, including also Ukraine, with participants from over 60 countries, public and private sector. Then we have NoBit Consortium, focused on payments, issuance, and acceptance. The third potential, with different use cases, electronic SIM registration, account opening, electronic driving license, electronic prescription, so use cases related to e-health sector. And last but not least, DC4EU, focused on educational credentials and professional qualifications. So you see, we are trying to cover the main use cases that can lead to the takeoff of EUDI wallet and the new electronic identity, European electronic identity ecosystem. So this consortia will be the first implementers of the reference implementation wallet and of the specifications of from the IREF. Is an ecosystem where each party is providing input to the others. For instance, who is developing the wallet prototype will provide input to the toolbox expert group working on the further iteration of the IRF. Also, the wallet prototype should be implemented by the large-scale pilot. Large-scale pilot consortia will provide to the developer of the wallet prototype their input and what they need more to adjust the reference implementation in order to cover those use cases. Also, large-scale pilot consortia will provide to the toolbox expert group their feedback for specifications needed in the further development of the IRF. Is a continuous work together and collaboration, of course.
I recently came across another association. So you've named a couple of them, and it's interesting to understand not just the ecosystem of private sector, public sector, but also these associations or communities like the Cloud Signature Consortium, which you're a part of, which is helping with the digital signatures in the EU wallets. And you mentioned ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standard Institute, which is has presented new standards. There's also another organization called the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, who recently wrote an open letter for the preservation of the electronic ledger provisions in eIDAS 2.0. As we're talking about these ecosystems like payments and prescriptions and education, how do we look at like the root of trusts or trusted issuers, trusted verifiers? And for the audience, both Viky and myself are spending considerable amount of time in these conversations, specifically at the Trust Over IP inside of the Trust Registry Task Force, just trying to understand how you implement these frameworks at scale so that you're able to have both authentic and authoritative information related to participants in an ecosystem. I mentioned the blockchain piece here too, because there are a lot of both public sector and private sector entities throughout the world that believe that ledgers are a good solution for managing roots of trusts or storage of PKI information or schema information and such. How is the EU looking at all of this and looking at trusted lists and trust registries and this whole space? Because I'm assuming with all of these use cases, you need to make sure that the proper issuers are issuing prescription credentials, or the proper educational entities are issuing educational or professional credentials. How is the EU looking at trust lists, or how are these different large-scale pilots even looking at this as well?
Just to mention about what you have said for the open letter regarding the blockchain. That letter was specifically addressing the fact that the last version of the compromise text from the parliament removed the section related to the blockchain as a qualified trust service provider, and I think they removed that because it was not clear, or perhaps needed to be better defined, the concept of the trust provider in a distributed ledger environment, because who is liable for what in a distributed ledger ecosystem. So that part probably will be better defined during the coming trialogue period. But coming back to the trust list and trust registries or trust, how do we check issuers, verifiers, and credentials? We currently have under the eIDAS regulation the so-called trust list, where the qualified trust service providers are listed with their services, and that list can be verified automatically by different implementations, or can be consulted by whoever wants to make a decision what provider to choose for a certain service. Now, under the new eIDAS 2, it is clear with the new services and the complex implementation for different use cases with electronic attestation of attributes that are the equivalent of verifiable credentials for the SSI world. A simple trust list can no longer cover all the needs and the sophisticated verifications. So the trust list can be implemented, and the trust ecosystem can be implemented in different ways: hierarchical, centralized, not centralized. We have to think realistically. We cannot rely on only one trust source. We have to rely on multiple trust frameworks and multiple trust lists. So the different consortia having such a variety of use cases in place will try out different formats and protocols and trust infrastructure to cover and to satisfy their use case requirements. Yes, I would mention here the efforts in Trust over IP Foundation, dealing with all our well-known colleagues and experts dealing with this concept of trust. I would rather see a kind of graph of trust where each party can choose the path to build their trust based on the use cases. So it's not one-way list where which you have to implement it and to consult it, because we have different data sources. We want to take off with the provisioning of electronic attestation of attributes. So we will have hopefully a lot of qualified trust service providers or non-qualified trust service providers issuing all sorts of credentials, and those have to be verified. Is this provider trusted? Can I trust this professional qualification that this person is showing up to me? How can I trust the issuer for this qualification? How can I trust that the certificate of qualification is still valid, has not been revoked? So we have a very, very complex environment, and we have to sort it out somehow.
Doesn't, by nature, a qualified trust service provider, they're qualified by someone, doesn't that mean they're already part of some list or some approval process or following some governance framework? Like, can't a qualified trust service provider just be considered as authentic or authoritative simply through the existing digital signature schemes that exist? They're qualified because they've gone through some process, therefore they're on some trust list. Do you need an additional trust list for qualified trust service providers, or is that kind of out of the box that they're already on some list?
Yes, for sure. The qualified trust service providers are trusted by default, and the service they are providing have the legal value. But you see now how the trust list is built. It allows you to publish the services that are currently under existing eIDAS regulation. With eIDAS 2, we have verifiable credentials, which is a more complex system where you have to list the new trust service provider, the new electronic attestation of attributes that is qualified or non-qualified. For non-qualified, you should find another mechanism or another trust list where to put that service. And the electronic attestation of attributes can be based on different solutions. So you can list or you cannot list on the existing trust list that service. For sure, it needs to be to be adapted to the new governance framework.
What governance oversight does the European Union want to have or is looking to have? Maybe it's too early to answer that, but if we move away from the qualified trust service providers and we think that, okay, there's going to be a vibrant market, because if we're looking at all this as kind of a utility and frameworks for the exchange of authentic, secure data, what governance is the European Union or nation states looking to have over the non-qualified trusted service provider market, or is it too early to answer that?
The non-qualified trust services are happening within a closed framework or a closed group. For instance, I am an issuer and I'm entering into agreement with a certain verifiers to rely their trust on the credentials that I'm issuing, on the electronic attestation of attributes that I'm issuing. So we agree together that what I issue is trusted and is working well for their needs to verifying certain type of information. So in that case, is not under eIDAS regulation umbrella. But if you are issuing a non-qualified trust service, a non-qualified electronic attestation of attributes, but you want to provide that through the wallet or to base your source of data through the wallet, in that case, you are entering under the eIDAS 2 umbrella, and you have to abide to certain requirements, to certain technology standards and governance, because it's a question of also liabilities. The EUDI wallet framework is guaranteeing to the citizen that they have full control of the data. They can share their information with relying parties that are asking those specific pieces of information for certain purpose. They cannot ask more than what they have declared to need for providing those services in exchange. So is a trust and reliable framework that is coming also with liabilities for the actors within this framework, liabilities for those that are breaching the rules. So you want to play in this framework, you should abide by the rules. You want to be free to do whatever you want, and you find your customers. You are free to do that. So nobody will impose you to not develop that service or to not put it on the market. It will be a balance between the market request, the user request, and the solutions that are provided by companies.
The place where I ask myself questions, and I had shared an article that I had written recently with you. There's a fine line between protecting the citizen and being overbearing with restrictions. And what concerns me, or where I maybe see risks in the digital identity space as it's evolving, is as public sector representatives, like, we want to protect our citizens. We want to create value for them, but we want to protect them. So we don't want them to be defrauded or scammed, or, like, of course. So there's measures being put into place to do that. But where maybe I have a gap is, like, if you look at other regulations, like the GDPR, for example, it's not like the guardrails aren't written in code for a company, like, that they can't deviate or do something. Like, if they deviate from it, there's fines and there's penalties and there's stuff like that, but they're not, like, impeded from doing stuff and innovating. And often with these things, you see, like, technology often pushes the boundaries of law, which is good to have that balance. And you don't want to get in front of innovation. And when I look at the digital credential space, I see, like, a vibrant market forming, especially on the verification side of things. You're going to need to have a large supply of credentials is just going to create more value on the consumption and on the verification side of things. But I see so many interesting opportunities for relying parties to really benefit from credentials coming from different sources that they're not able to access today, that they're able to guarantee that they're verifiable and that it's authentic data, that they're able to do this with different levels of privacy preservation, which just makes their lives easier at times and reduces their liability. So I could see on the issuer side of things that having a little bit more tight governance over issuer lists or who could issue what, that's more understandable for me versus the verification side of things, where I don't think we necessarily know the types of verifications that are going to happen and what's even possible, because we've never had this environment with all this verifiable data sitting inside of someone's wallet. So if all issuers and all verifiers need to kind of register in some central management, that's where I struggle to see, like, is how well does this work?
Yeah, actually, I believe that the verification of credentials would be a very good service, trust service in itself, because it's part of the management of a credential. So the relying party does not necessarily need to integrate with all credentials providers. Some company may decide to play this role to verify all sorts of credentials or electronic attestation of attributes, and to provide to relying parties the certainty that that credential is still valid, has not been revoked, or is updated, or has been revoked. Of course, here is plenty of space for innovation and technology. What has to be taken into consideration as a mandatory, one of the mandatory requirements coming from eIDAS 2, that the issuer of the electronic attestation of attribute must not learn anything about the usage of that attribute by the user to the relying party. So you have to solve this problem if you want to play in this space as a verifier for different attributes or verifiable credentials. You should follow this strict rule that you don't have evidence for the user where is showing his credential, how many times, and to not collect that data, and to not put different pieces of information together in order to profile the user. So definitely the verification of credentials and of electronic attestation of attributes will have a big takeoff.
Are there other challenges, or maybe positively framing them as opportunities, that you see based on where things are at right now? I've heard people talk about maybe there's too many restrictions in certain places and they could see like a parallel network working. But I think as we're talking about here, it's just about finding the right balance in things. Where do you see potential opportunities or things that should be happening in the months and I guess years to come? Because this is not a quick deployment that's going to happen.
Yes, so we're happening in 2 years for now, and hopefully in 2 years we'll have the first use cases implemented and starting to rolling out. So, of course, first of all, is the possibility to have all sorts of electronic attestation of attributes, which, in my opinion, is fascinating, and that will alleviate the life and cost for relying parties, for verifiers, that they need to process paper, and they need to verify paper and to store paper, and under GDPR you need to also the personal information on paper-based needs to be protected. So in this new ecosystem, identity data and attributes linked to legal electronic identities and the usage of EUDI wallet will make the data trustworthy and legally enforceable across borders. So this will be a major success, to be able as a citizen to open. I give you my example. So I'm a Romanian citizen, and I moved 3 years ago in Italy, and I needed to open a bank account. So I went to a branch, and then started the whole process of verifying me, verifying my previous account with other banks in Romania that needed 2 weeks. Yeah, in an accelerated procedure, 2 weeks to verify my account, and it took 3 weeks to open a bank account. What you cannot do anything without a bank account in a country, right? So your life is starting from that point. So being able, once the EUDI wallet will be in place, to use all your personal information and qualifications and proofs with legal value across border will be fantastic. So we will shift from reliance on national solutions to those that are available cross-border. Of course, this all new framework is coming with challenges, and I will start mentioning the NIS2 directive. So it's a directive, will be implemented by each member state within their national legislation. We may have discrepancies, we may have different implementations, and the trust service providers are considered, the trust service provisioning is considered critical infrastructure according to NIS2 directive. So we as a provider should abide to those additional rules and supervision. And another challenge that is coming into my mind right now is the general lack of mature standards for these new services. So standards that have been deployed but not tried in the context of the European digital identity, or standards that need to be complemented with additional not yet mature standards in order to cover the requirements for the new services. Open source implementations for many of the standards. We decide what to take, what to implement, and how to do it. But are we sure that can be scalable, is sustainable, the business model? Because in the end, is a costly service that needs to be paid somehow. But I'm really confident that eIDAS 2 will be a huge opportunity for us as citizens, but also for the market, for the technology providers to show their innovations and the new ways of looking at this multi-faceted concept that is digital identity and electronic identity.
As there's this toolbox for wallets that is being developed in parallel, there's a recently new foundation, the Open Wallet Foundation, which has some maybe overlapping aspirations as well. Is there collaboration happening between these two efforts to perhaps gain alignment?
Well, I think it's too soon to talk about a collaboration, but the approach for the EUDI wallet reference implementation is to have a solution, an open source solution that can be modularly developed and with a plugin-based approach. And for sure, the Open Wallet Foundation has a role to play here, as is proposing to have with an open source license approach. At the same time, different modules that can be used by the European Union member states. So think about a member state is taking the reference wallet implementation that provides standard capabilities, but can decide to put different modules and to add different modules to that reference implementation in order to enrich the solution and to be able to provide many other services.
Yeah, so with the European Union reference architecture or that toolbox, you could perhaps think about in the future, maybe there's an open source payments component that comes out of the Open Wallet Foundation that you could tie into it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's more componentized. Still on the topic.
Yeah, I wouldn't think necessarily to the payment, because when we talk about wallet, everybody thinks on payment. But the wallet the digital wallets move their initial mission as a payment mechanism to different others. So became more and more complex, holding all type of credentials and being able to provide all sorts of operations. So I don't know, I would say, give me another example, not payment necessarily. What would you see as an important new component for a wallet, for instance?
I think if you take it from the lens, and again, back to the Trust over IP Foundation's architecture model, just thinking about different types of credential exchanges, like issuing credentials and presenting proofs as trust tasks. There's all sorts. And then if you think about trust tasks as really being like micro apps or components or microservices, payments is one example, but I could think about like asking a trust registry for information as kind of a trust task, or being able to do secure like client to client messaging is another type of trust task. And so I threw in payments there just as an example. I understand that opens up a whole can of worms. It becomes complicated there, but it was more from that perspective that there's going to be different micro apps or components that could be, I guess, categorized as trust tasks. And if they fit within the architecture, you could see how they could complement each other quite nicely.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, what the people are doing in Trust over IP Foundation is fascinating. I really enjoy all the meetings together, and the discussions, which are very, very challenging.
Likewise, still on the topic of challenges or opportunities, this is a reality for us, me as a Canadian citizen. It's happened in Canada where there's been either misinformation or disinformation around digital identity to the point where some programs have been canceled or halted because of public pressure. And there's this rhetoric around, I don't know how prevalent it is in the European Union, but that governments are trying to control you and have a backdoor to your data and everything. Yes. Is this a problem in the European Union as well? Because it's enough of a problem.
Yeah, well, I think
the Canadian market.
Yes, no, this is a problem everywhere. I don't think it's only in Canada or United States or in the European Union. Yes, for sure, the communication and the market education is a very important component for the success of this new framework. And I'm sure that each member state will have a dedicated program to communicate to the citizens the benefits of the new electronic identity or of the EUDI wallet. The private sector, of course, should contribute to that. It is really fundamental to pass the right message to the citizens, because otherwise they will perceive that a mechanism of surveillance or a mechanism of control. And if we don't manage to do that as soon as possible, the risk is that the other side of the community that is against the digital services, against microchips, against everything is digital, against vaccination, against green pass, against, they will move to advocate against digital identity and digital wallet. And one of the first question that is coming into everyone's minds when they are thinking or hearing for the first time of digital identity and digital wallet, how can I be sure that the government is not tracking me? How can I be sure that who is providing me a certain service is not following my further interactions? Where do I use those that service? And profile me and create, store the information about my movement. The answer is that the regulation, eIDAS 2 regulation, specifically forbids to have access to the usage of the wallet, to the usage of electronic identity, to the usage of electronic credentials. And that will be part of the auditing and approval process for the services that would be on place and rolled out. So you see, we have the mechanism. The important part is to communicate them in a language that is understandable to anyone. So they don't care about technical standards. They don't care about, I don't know, who governance is able to verify the provider and to monitor the provider. They need to understand that that is technically not possible. That is by regulation forbidden, and who is breaching that regulation will have to pay a consistent amount of money.
Even in Canada, there's considerations of moving away from the term digital identity because it leads to misinformation and disinformation campaigns from people. But I found this interesting. I was talking to one of my colleagues, Mike, at Northern Block last week, and his comment is like, the centralized ID is already there. Like, we're tracked through GPS that we use every day to drive everywhere. We're tracked through our telcos. We're tracked through our payments. We're tracked through boarding passes. There's data aggregators that are there.
Yeah.
So
everywhere.
it exists today. So it's like the work that we're doing here is not to create something new. It's to really put the right principles in place so that we could not be tracked as we are being tracked today, because it's already existent.
Yeah. And you see the people are spreading their data everywhere for no reason. No, think about TikTok, no, or Facebook, or other platforms. They are giving their data very happily, and when they are talking about a service that is really useful, they are starting asking questions or having doubts. Why you are asking me that? Why? How can I be sure that you are not monitoring me? But TikTok is monitoring you, even if you don't use the application.
Yeah, even I've been thinking recently about ChatGPT. The amount of information that people are dumping into that is extraordinary. Yeah. Viky, thank you very much for doing this with me today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure that the audience will find it very informative as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mathieu, for inviting me, and thanks everybody who is listening to this episode. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.